Hey, it's Sarai. So for the month of July, while Haley's on maternity leave, we're re-airing our super popular Space Camp series. In this 4-part series, Haley and I will give you a ton of ideas to set up your dream sewing space. So if you tuned in for the original broadcast of Space Camp, I really recommend tuning in again because you might learn something new this time around and it will help you tidy up your sewing space. Thanks for listening. I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Let's talk about our topic for today. So when we poll seam workers, one of the biggest obstacles that they face as sewists are managing their sewing spaces. So whether they're in small spaces or large spaces or somewhere in between, it's an issue for a lot of us. And I think a big part of that is because sewing as a hobby comes with a lot of stuff. And managing it all in a way that makes it easy for you to sew is a big challenge for so many people, including myself. That's definitely one of the challenges that I have that I'm going to be working on during summer camp. And I'll talk a little bit about that too today. The first step of getting your sewing space in shape is examining the space you've got to work with. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So Haley, you want to start us off?
Yes. So today is all about observing what you have to work with, not what you want necessarily, although we will get to that at the very end. But I think it's really great to start with what you're working with. As a designer, this is what I always start with is my constraints.
Right.
So you might want to go grab a pen and paper to follow along with some of these prompts as we go through this episode. So the first thing that we want to have you do is we want to have you observe 3 qualities about your space. And those qualities are going to be size, light, and cleanliness. And we're going to dig into each of those a little bit right now. So the first one is size. And I think that this is like one of those ones that people write off because they're like, well, what am I going to do about the size of the space I've got? I've got what I got. And this is true to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. This is something you may not have a ton of control over unless you are like moving in the very near future. But over the years, I've seen people make incredibly small spaces work in such creative ways. A while back, we had a survey about people's sewing spaces and people sent in pictures. And we got dozens of responses from people who sew in closets, dozens of people who sew in RVs or at their kitchen tables, and they make it work in really creative, unique ways. So my first question for you is, how much space do you currently have? Think about if you're happy with this amount of space or not, or do you find your space limiting in some way? I think a lot of us tend to jump to like, oh, not enough space. But for some people, maybe having too much space is an obstacle for you because the more space you have, the more space you will fill.
Not a problem I have or have ever had, but
I've never had that problem. But like, you know, I'd like to acknowledge that maybe someone has that problem.
Actually, you know, I take that back because we do have a lot of space at work.
Yeah,
and
that's
it does
true.
Get full of stuff. Uh-huh. And cleaning it out and getting rid of things is a big part of keeping that space organized.
It's just a constant thing. I like constantly pushing that rock up that hill.
Well, I stole one of the sample garments from work. I have it in my closet, so I'm doing my part.
Yeah. Thank you. I salute you. So yes, think about the amount of space you have. Think about whether you're happy about it or not, or if it's limiting you in some way. And here's where I'd like to encourage you to think outside of the box a little bit. Think about some solutions to whatever your space issue might be. Maybe you have really limited space. So what are the things you could do for having limited space? You could relocate your sewing space. If you have like a linen closet, you can take the doors off of it and put a desk in there and make a little sewing nook for yourself. Maybe you need to relocate your stash and your storage kind of off-site so that your actual active sewing space is a little bit more usable. There's less clutter. It makes it easier for you to get things done. Or maybe you just need to do a big downsize of your stash. These are all options that you have available to you if you're struggling with limited space. Mm-hmm. And storage is a big part of space, but don't worry about storage quite yet. We are going to be getting into that a little bit later.
Yeah, I think getting some of my stuff outside of my primary sewing space has been a real game changer for me.
Yeah, I've historically always sewn in really small places. And when I started rethinking my organization, that's when it really like opened up a lot more possibilities for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
The next thing I want to have you guys think about is light. And I think that this is something that people tend to consider as an afterthought when creating a space, when really it is like one of the most impactful things that you can do for a space. So think about the lighting that you currently have. Is it adequate? Can you see your projects? Something that I always consider is, do you mostly sew at night or during the day? I think a lot of sewers sew at night after dinner or after they put the kids down. And if so, then you're going to want to examine the light in that space during the time of day that you're sewing most often. And this is helpful because if you're considering relocating your sewing space or even just shifting your desk to a different location, you're going to want to consider the lighting. Is it a simple matter of putting a higher wattage bulb in your overhead lighting? Do you need to get some task lights? Do you need to get a headlamp?
Ooh, I like that idea.
You know, be a dork, save your eyes.
There's nothing dorky about a headlamp. I love headlamps.
I love them. It's like my favorite camping gear is my headlamp. You got to go pee. You got to have one. You got to have a headlamp.
Yeah, I love my headlamp. I mean, I use it here because it's so dark at night out here. If you need to walk to the mailbox or whatever, it's good to have a headlamp.
That's so clever. I'm in like a virtual sewing group or knitting group, and there's a divide in our group of people who are willing, who many of us go out and we knit like at a bar or at a cafe or whatever. But when you're at a bar, lots of times the lighting is like not so great. And some of my friends will knit in a bar with their headlamp on.
Wow. Okay. Like, that's not something I've done.
And my friend Christine is like, I will not sit with you if you do that.
Oh, I would.
And it's like I'm like, I really don't care. I have like no shame. So it's a very polarizing thing, the headlamp.
Well, I think just don't look directly at the server.
Yeah, just
is the only. If you do that, then that's not cool. But that's very interesting. Wow, I never would have even thought about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought maybe one of those little, I don't know if you've seen those little task lights that you can like clip onto the edge of your book. That have a little like tiny pen light on it.
Yeah, they make ones too that go around your neck like a necklace.
Oh.
And so it points down at like whatever the subject is you're looking down at, which is maybe better when the server comes by.
Yeah, that seems like a little bit safer for people's eyes. It's pointing at your knitting and not at whatever you happen to be looking at.
I agree.
Like, I don't know. When I'm in a bar, a lot of times my eyes just get naturally drawn to the television. There's always a television on with sports.
Yeah, and people watching, like I'm always looking at people's clothes, and then there's going to be a spotlight on the lady's jean pockets as she walks by.
I know exactly what you're looking at and who you're looking at. Yeah. I don't know if I would go that far now. You bring up some excellent points. All right. Well, we liked the headlamp idea. We got a little bit carried away with that tangent.
It's all right.
Any other lighting tips?
I mean, I think that like task lamps, consider, you know, whether you want to have like a floor task lamp, if you have space on your table to have a task lamp there or not. But just like considering lighting from the jump is really great. I know that I personally, because I sew for work and it's part of my job, there is a lot of my sewing happens during daylight hours. So for me, I always like to make sure that I am putting my desk by a window whenever possible, because I just find natural light a little bit easier on my eyes.
Yeah. One thing that I'm concerned about. So right now, Haley and I are sitting in my office/sewing room, and soon it's going to become just my office because I have a backyard shed that we're retrofitting and turning into my little sewing and podcasting studio. So that is located under a bunch of trees, and it does have windows and it has a French door in front, but it's still going to be much, much darker than it is in this room right now. This room is extremely bright. So that's one thing I've been thinking a lot about, is how to keep things well lit. What I really like are those clip-on task lamps that you can clip onto the edge of like your cutting table or your desk. You can move those around. I find those to be really, really helpful because you can just put them anywhere to give really task-oriented light.
Yeah.
All right. So Haley went over size, which includes things about, storage and also lighting in your sewing space. So we've kind of looked at where you are right now with those two things. The next thing that we're going to look at, the final thing, is cleanliness, or as I like to think about it, tidiness, because I'm not the tidiest person and I don't like to think of myself as unclean, just not tidy. So the questions around your sewing space right now might be, how clean do you keep your space right now, or tidy? And how clean would you like to keep it? So I think those are two really important questions, because seeing the discrepancy between the two can be really helpful to understand what you might need to build more of into your future sewing space. Mm-hmm. So once you've kind of got those two things in mind, think about what's stopping you. Is it accessibility of your storage? Or maybe you just don't have enough storage, or maybe you just don't have the right pieces to use while you're actually engaged in the task. So notice what would help you to keep it clean. So as an example, I mentioned that I'm going to be moving my sewing space soon, and my new sewing space is going to be quite different because it's going to be dedicated, which means I don't have existing furniture in there right now. So I'm kind of designing it from the ground up. I'm moving some of the furniture that I have in there, but there's going to be some other stuff that won't be there. Mm-hmm. So what I've been doing is, as I'm sewing, I will take notes on how I'm using my existing space so that I can replicate that or find new solutions in my new space. Mm-hmm. So to give you an example, the other day I was cutting out a pattern on my cutting table, and right next to my cutting table, there's a huge bookshelf. And so I noticed that as I'm cutting, oftentimes when you're cutting, you need to move things off your cutting table because you need to spread out the fabric, right? So I'll use the bookshelf. I'll put my pins over there. I'll stick the scissors or my shears over there. My marking pencil, I'll just leave it on the bookshelf right next to me so that I can get it out of the way. But I'm not going to have a bookshelf in the new space unless I buy one. Mm-hmm. So I wrote that down and I thought, well, I can get maybe a shelf or maybe a caddy that can go, I can roll it around and put my tools on it, almost like a cart they would use in a hospital to put your tools on. So just taking some notes on how you're currently using your space. And if you notice yourself like not having a place to put something or dumping this is something I do all the time. When I'm cutting, I just kind of throw my trash on the ground and trash, the paper from the pattern, the excess paper. I don't think I'm throwing trash on the ground. Sounds terrible. I just throw it on the floor until later, and then I pick it all up after the cats have played with it for a while, which is fine. But if I want to keep things tidier, maybe I should get like a little recycling bin that I can move around with me. So things like that. I think just taking some notes on how you currently use your space and what you find to be missing can be so, so helpful to this whole process. So we've talked about those three main aspects: size, light, and cleanliness. So just to kind of round this out, here are some things that you can take note on. So if you have your pen and paper, here are some things that might help you to reimagine your space from where you are right now. You're going to notice what you want to change and what you want to keep. So what are the top 2 to 3 things that you want to change in your space? And then write down what are the top 2 to 3 things that you want to keep in your space. So that can be really, really helpful to kind of give you an overall picture of where you want to go and where you are right now. That's been already very helpful. And that can be related to the 3 things that we already talked about: size, lighting, and cleanliness, or it might be something completely different. So once you've got that, try to envision the best version of your space. What does that look like for you? Because this is really different for every person. Everybody has not just their own style, but their own way of enhancing their creativity through the environment that they're in. So write a statement about your own dream sewing space. We have a few examples here. So you might write, my space is bright and intentionally messy, or my space is small, but it's well organized, or my space is a representation of my creativity. Maybe that's something that's really important to you. Or my space is peaceful and quiet. Those are all great answers, and they're going to vary from person to person. Some people love to have a really cluttered, or what some people might think of as cluttered, space with lots of tools all over. they feel that that's very inspiring to see all their stuff out, see all their inspiration out. And I think that can look amazing as well. Or some people like something that's very just quiet and serene and makes them feel calm when they come into it. And it really just depends on the person. So that's something I've been thinking about a lot as I'm transitioning into the new space eventually. And it can also help to look at, I think, some inspirational photos of other people's creative spaces. I think that's really, really helpful too, to kind of help you to envision which of these types of spaces might be best for you.
Yeah, that's a great tip. If you have worked through thinking about size, light, cleanliness, and you're still feeling a little bit stuck, definitely take a look at some inspiration and take some notes from those things to help you to consider. I know for me in this season of my life, I'm not looking to do a full redo of my sewing space, but I do have a pain point in my sewing space right now, which is my closet. And that is what I'm going to be focusing on in these 4 weeks, is how to make that closet space, which is where I store all of my fabric and my patterns and bigger gear items. How am I going to make that easier to navigate and use so that I can sew more often and access the things I need to sew more often?
Yeah. I think we all have those. If you're kind of more settled in your space, I think we all have those kinds of pain points. I also want to mention that if you're curious about this whole backyard sewing studio thing, it's in the process of being built right now. We have somebody's here doing the drywall at this moment, but I'm going to be doing at least one YouTube video on the whole thing. And that will be, I don't know exactly when that's going to be up, because I don't actually know when this shed's going to be finished. But once it's done, you'll be able to find that on our YouTube channel. So if you're not a subscriber over on YouTube, I definitely recommend going over there, because I think it's going to be a really fun video. And hopefully, Haley, you'll be able to help me with outfitting the whole thing. Maybe we can do that together.
Oh, I'm so on it. Let's do it.
I feel a little bit stuck still. So I think these 4 weeks are going to be really helpful for getting my mind in the game and then doing the whole thing up after that. So very excited about this. Oh, I also wanted to mention, I mentioned inspiration. One of the things that has been inspiring me, there's a magazine called In Her Studio. I have a copy of it downstairs, and it's basically just interviews with artists and creative people and images from their studios.
Oh, cool.
So that's been really inspiring to me, because there's just all different kinds of artists, and there's textile artists, and I think there's somebody in there who does some professional sewing. There's people who design knitting. There's all kinds of stuff in there, and everybody has such different spaces. I think it's really cool. And that always inspires me. And of course, Pinterest is obviously a place you can go and look.
Yeah.
But I find that sometimes on Pinterest, it's hard to find things that are different. I feel like there's a lot of stuff that just looks kind of, when I search for like sewing space or sewing studio design or something like that, like they all kind of look the same.
You really have to go down the rabbit hole to find the different things.
Yeah. I think, and just getting inspiration from other types of rooms or other types of creative spaces can be really helpful. A painting studio, or, then if you really want to inject your own personality into it, because I just feel like a lot of, when you do a search on Pinterest, it just brings up the most popular results.
Right.
So you just see like the stuff that looks kind of good for a lot of people.
Yeah, totally. All right. We have some really great tips, and I'm going to run through them again real quick before we wrap things up. So in this episode, we're inviting you to observe 3 main qualities about your existing space. We're inviting you to take a look at the size of your space and reflect on that, your lighting situation, what you like about it, what you need to change to be able to see things adequately, and the cleanliness, and just kind of pondering how clean you keep your space versus how clean you'd like to keep it, the discrepancy between those two things, and the obstacles that are keeping you from keeping it the way you'd like. And then to round things off, we are asking you to take some notes. We want you to write down 2 to 3 things that you'd like to change about your space. I think that this helps make everything a little bit less unruly and really focus on what it is that you are going to be working on in the upcoming 4 weeks. And then the top 2 to 3 things that you want to keep. And I like this because it's like a little appreciation, a little love letter to your space as it is, because as much as we want to change things, it's good to acknowledge the good that exists already. And then we want you to write a statement about your dream space. This will be totally unique to you. And don't forget to snag all of our free camp goodies by visiting seamwork.com/go/sewing camp. Camp runs all of June and July, so make sure you go to that URL and grab those freebies while you still can. And of course, as always, if you like this episode, please leave us a review. It helps other people who love sewing and chatting about sewing to find us. And it also helps us to know, that you like what we're doing. That's important. You can also find us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. Hopefully check out Sarai's studio tour pretty soon. Follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you like what we're doing and you're not already a member of Seamwork, you should definitely go and join Seamwork and become a part of our online private community and get access to hundreds of sewing patterns, dozens of sew-along classes, and podcast listeners get a special deal. You get a 50% off lifetime discount when you join at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. That is seamwork.com/go/podcast50.
All right. And that's it for the first episode of Summer Sewing Camp. We hope to see you again next week for the next installment of Looking at Your Sewing Space. I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.